5 years ago, she learned how to survive his death. Tonight, Lady Emilia Ashford discovered she must learn how to survive his return. The man who strode back into Ashworth Hall on the eve of her engagement was not the reckless, smiling captain she had loved, but a scarred, formidable ghost who carried the stench of the battlefield and the weight of an unpayable accusation. He was alive, he was fierce, and he demanded to know why she had given up on him, shattering the safe, cold life she had so carefully constructed. And as Captain Rowan Hale's haunted eyes met hers, Emilia realized the truth was far more terrifying than the grief she had carried. Someone had betrayed them both, ensuring their love would never be more than a casualty of war and cruel ambition. Part 1. The Ghost at Her Door. The scent of polished wood and wilting lilies hung heavy in the drawing room of Ashworth Hall, a grand yet stifling perfume that felt entirely appropriate for Lady Emilia Ashford's present state of mind. 5 years. 5 endless seasons had passed since the last official dispatch arrived from the continent, delivering the crushing, yet mercifully vague news that Captain Rowan Hale, son of a respectable but scarcely wealthy baronet, was presumed lost in action. Emilia had mourned him with the quiet, devastating precision expected of a gentlewoman. She had worn the obligatory pale shades, refused all invitations for a season, and then, slowly, she had done the duty asked of her. She had returned to life. Yet a part of her heart remained a cold, closed room, undisturbed by the sun or the cheerful clamor of the present. Rowan, with his reckless grin, his quick, intelligent eyes, and the passionate promises exchanged in the secret shelter of the ancient oak near the river, was the ghost that guarded that room. Now, at the age of 23, her duty to her grief had been superseded by her duty to her family.
"Lord Ridley is an admirable match, Emilia," her mother the Countess declared, adjusting a perfectly starched cuff. "The estate is prodigious, the title unimpeachable, and his influence in Parliament would secure your brother's position for years to come. One must admit, after 5 years, even the deepest attachment must yield to logic." Logic. Lord Vincent Ridley embodied it entirely. He was powerful, courteous, and utterly devoid of the spontaneous joy that had made Rowan Hale feel like sunlight breaking through the clouds. Ridley offered a future carved from granite, secure, unmoving, and cold. He possessed the sort of grave, watchful handsomeness that promised stability. In 2 days, an exclusive gathering would be held at Ashworth Hall, where the formal announcement of their engagement would solidify a practical alliance that promised to lift the Ashworth finances from their perpetual, polite precariousness. Emilia looked out the window at the familiar parkland, already dusted with the silver frost of an early autumn. She felt like a beautiful, well-tended machine, wound up to perform the most critical function of her life, marriage. She would be a dutiful wife, manage a fine household, and bear the requisite heirs. It was a life, but not the life she had once dreamed of, a life that now existed only in the tattered pages of memory. She accepted a cup of tea, the china trembling slightly in her hand. "He is, Mamma, entirely suitable." This was the quiet betrayal she committed daily, using the language of decorum to mask the hollowness within. The hour was late, the drawing-room abandoned, and the servants had retired, leaving the great house in the charged stillness that precedes a major event. Emilia, unable to find rest, was wandering the long, silent corridor of ancestral portraits, tracing the faded lines of women who, like her, had secured fortunes and titles without a whisper of personal desire.
A sudden, sharp hammering on the main oak door shattered the tranquility. It was far too late for a social call, too rough for a proper post-delivery, and too urgent for a lost traveler. A moment later, the aged butler, Mr. Thorne, appeared, his face a pale, horrified mask. "My lady," he whispered, his voice shaking, There is a man at the door. He insists on seeing you. He claims..." "Claims what, Thorne?" Emilia asked, stepping forward, feeling a curious, icy dread replacing her fatigue. "He claims to be Captain Hale, my lady, but he is not, as we remember." The name, Rowan Hale, felt like a physical blow. It was the forbidden word, the ghost suddenly given substance. Impossible. It was a cruel jest, a madman, a desperate beggar attempting to exploit a known tragedy. Yet a frantic, irrational hope, or was it fear, pulled her towards the main entrance. Thorne attempted to block her way, his elderly frame rigid with protective concern. "Lady Emilia, please, he is disfigured. He has a soldier's look about him, hardened." She pushed past him, her silk dressing gown a mere barrier against the chilling draft from the hall. The massive door had been opened only a crack, but even the dim glow of the oil lantern was enough to illuminate the figure standing upon the threshold. He was massive, not in the sleek, tailored way of the gentleman of the ton, but with the solid, formidable breath of a man who had survived hardship and brute labor. He was clad in ill-fitting, rough wool and a long, dark military coat, travel-stained and worn. His face. Emilia's breath hitched, trapping a scream in her throat. The structure was undeniably Rowan's, the strong, aristocratic jawline, the stubborn set of the brow, but the rest was a landscape of violence. A jagged, livid scar pulled the corner of his mouth into a permanent sneer, disappearing into a beard grown thick and untidy. His hair was cropped short, his eyes sunken, weary and colder than the winter sea. But those eyes, they were the same startling shade of deep hazel, now burning with an intensity that bordered on fury. They raked over her, from the silken luxury of her night attire to the diamond locket she still wore, a gift from him years ago. For a long, paralyzing moment, only the wind sighing through the colonnade broke the silence. "Emilia," he grated, the sound of her name unrecognizable, raw, and full of accusation. She felt the blood drain from her head. "Rowan?" The word was a mere breath, a question, an affirmation, a prayer. "The very same ghost you put to rest 5 years ago," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. He took a single, deliberate step into the hall, the sound of his heavy, scuffed boots echoing on the marble floor. He looked at her, truly looked at the woman in her elegant gown, bathed in the warmth of her privileged life, and the anger blazing in his eyes was almost unbearable. "I return to claim the bride who was promised to me," he continued, the words dropping like stones into a well. "But it seems, Lady Emilia, that you tired of waiting for the dead. I see you are about to pledge your hand to a man who, unlike me, had the good sense to stay alive and whole." He gestured vaguely at her left hand, where the heavy, sparkling promise of Lord Ridley's engagement ring would soon sit. The bitter irony in his tone was sharp enough to draw blood. "Why, Rowan? Why did you never return sooner? We received nothing, not a word, only the official casualty report." Her voice was gaining strength, fueled by a terrible confusion that fought the desperate, exhilarating joy of his survival. He laughed, a short, harsh sound that held no humor.
It was the laugh of a man who had learned the world was a treacherous place. Letters, Emilia? I wrote dozens. I wrote to you from every miserable, frozen hole the king saw fit to bury me in. I wrote from the hospital and from the trenches. I wrote with a pen and with blood, telling you I was alive, that I was coming back for you. I even sent a dozen dispatches imploring your family for a loan to purchase my commission discharge. Where are those letters? He fixed her with a terrifying gaze, the accusation absolute. Answer me, Emilia. Where were you when I was sending you the truth? Why did you give up on me? The question hung between them, a tangible, burning barrier, more frightening than the ghost-like familiarity of the man standing before her. She was faced not with the sweet, romantic hero of her youth, but a scarred, formidable stranger who had crossed death itself only to find that the prize he had fought for, her heart, had seemingly been withdrawn in his absence. Part 2. Letters that never arrived. The confrontation in the chilly, echoing hall ended only when Emilia's father, Lord Ashworth, roused by the unfamiliar clamor, descended the staircase in a state of flustered shock. The sight of the man Thorne had identified as Captain Hale caused the Earl to recoil, his hand instinctively gripping the banister for support. Lord Ashworth was a man whose delicate nerves were better suited to handling ledgers than the raw reality of war's wreckage. "Rowan Hale?" the Earl stammered, peering at the scars. "But the reports were explicit. A memorial service was held 5 years ago." "The reports were inaccurate, my lord, and I assure you, no service was required. Though I admit, at times I feared my own funeral had begun early."
Emilia took charge, her shock solidifying into a fierce, protective necessity. The hour, the man, and the scandal were too overwhelming to be addressed on the doorstep. She ordered Thorne to settle Rowan into the small, rarely used library, a room tucked away at the back of the house, far from the approaching preparations for the engagement party. The ensuing hours were a disorienting blend of tense interrogation and agonizing, silent longing. In the flickering light of the library's single lamp, Rowan looked less like a ghost and more like a warrior returned from a devastating crusade. He refused refreshment, accepting only a glass of brandy, which he nursed in silence, his eyes fixed on Emilia. "You must understand," Emilia began, her voice strained. "We had no reason to doubt the official dispatch. Your family, they mourned you as well. They were told of a swift engagement, a collapse of the position, and no survivors recovered." Rowan's jaw worked beneath his beard. "Lies. All lies, designed to make a clean break. I was captured, Emilia, not for a matter of weeks, but months, and then, once freed, I was shuffled through every godforsaken hospital ward in Europe, then recommissioned, then wounded again. But from the moment I could hold a pen, I wrote." He pushed a calloused hand through his short, rough hair. "I never stopped writing. Every letter was addressed to you, Lady Emilia, and to your father. I spoke of where I was, what I needed, and the day I would be on the first available ship home. If you received nothing, then someone, here or abroad, went to great lengths to ensure those letters never reached Ashworth Hall." Emilia sat on the edge of a heavy leather chair, feeling the weight of the past 5 years pressing down on her. The absence had been a clean wound. This sudden, violent return was a festering one. "Why, Rowan?" she whispered. "Why did you never find a way back sooner? If you knew the letters were failing, why not a coded message? Why not an agent? You know the importance of my future." The word future felt like a betrayal. His cold eyes flashed. "Do you think I willingly stayed in a place where death walked freely? I was a soldier, Emilia, bound by duty and utterly stripped of coin and influence.
Once I realized my correspondence was being intercepted, a suspicion confirmed by the complete lack of replies, I made repeated attempts to purchase my discharge. But every communication with my solicitor was met with reports that were confusing. And then, a year ago, I received one very clear, very damning piece of news. Rowan stood, moving with a restless energy that felt too large for the room. He leaned over the heavy mahogany table, his fists flat against the polished surface. "I was told, repeatedly and convincingly, that you were married. Not just engaged, but already Mrs. Somebody, that you had long since settled into your comfortable life and your new alliance, and that I was a fool to imagine you would wait for a man who might never return, or worse, return broken." Emilia stared, aghast. "Married? That is a heinous lie. I have worn no ring but the locket you gave me, and I have never entertained a proposal until Lord Ridley's, and that was only arranged weeks ago, as a necessity." The tension in the room was a living thing, heavy with unspoken longing and deep resentment. They were two wounded souls, he physically scarred and betrayed by the world, she emotionally scarred by a deceit she was only now beginning to comprehend. The truth was finally exposed, but it was ugly. Someone had lied to both of them. The following morning was a blur of frantic social diplomacy and hushed clandestine meetings. Lord Ashworth, terrified of the impending scandal and the ruin of his carefully laid plans with Lord Ridley, pleaded with Rowan to take a generous sum of money and discreetly depart. Rowan refused with cold dignity. He had not survived a war to be bought off like a stable hand. Emilia found herself torn. The man who had returned was harder, quieter, carrying the weight of secrets she could not pierce. Yet when their eyes met, the old, familiar electricity sparked, a terrifying reminder of the depth of their connection. During a fraught breakfast, where Rowan sat like a silent, unwelcome monolith at the corner of the table, he looked at Emilia, his voice lowered. "Whoever did this," he murmured, "they knew your family was desperate for funds, and they knew my letters contained the truth of my survival, and my intention to secure you. But who would have the influence to intercept official military correspondence and the motive to steal my hand and my fortune?" Emilia countered, glancing nervously at the footman. It was later that day, as the preparations for the grand engagement gathering began in earnest, that the first piece of undeniable evidence appeared. Lord Ashworth had demanded that all former correspondence, anything related to Captain Hale, be gathered and secured, intending to destroy the evidence that his supposed death was a mistake. Emilia was supervising the process in her father's private study, assisting the footman and cataloging stacks of 5-year-old financial papers, when she noticed a drawer in the heavy antique desk, a drawer her father never used, containing only old maps and land deeds. It was slightly ajar. She slid it open. Beneath a rolled map of the Ashworth North Field was a heavy, linen-tied bundle. It was small, discreet, and utterly out of place. With trembling fingers, Emilia pulled the twine loose. The first sheet was brittle and faded, postmarked 4 years ago from a Continental Field hospital. The handwriting was unmistakably Rowan's, bold, precise, and achingly familiar.
"My dearest Emilia, the surgeons say I will live, though I am scarcely a pretty sight. But I am coming home. Hold fast to your promise, for you are the only hope I possess. I implore you, speak to your father about finding a means to purchase my full discharge." Emilia gasped, tears blurring the furious ink. Here was the truth, undeniable and heartbreaking, held captive by silence. But how had it come to rest in her father's private study? Then, the true horror of the discovery materialized. Tucked neatly beneath Rowan's letters, almost as a weight to keep them flat, was a visiting card. It was engraved with the meticulous, elaborate crest of the man who was due to claim her in 48 hours. Lord Vincent Ridley. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Not a clerk, not a distant relation, but the powerful, wealthy suitor himself. Lord Ridley, a man of profound influence and vast resources, had orchestrated the monstrous deceit. He had intercepted the letters, perhaps paying off a corrupted contact in the military office or at the post, and fed false reports to Rowan, all while systematically eliminating the rival for Emilia's hand and fortune. Emilia clutched the bundle, dozens of letters, proof of Rowan's survival, proof of his devotion, now cold evidence of a shocking betrayal meant to steal her hand, her future, and her peace. She felt a swift, terrifying drop into cold clarity. The betrayal was not merely against Rowan. It was a profound, calculated cruelty against her. Lord Ridley hadn't simply offered stability. He had demanded control, built upon a foundation of absolute lies. Emilia tucked the letters into her bodice, the rough paper resting against her racing heart. She knew now she could not marry him. She could not, in good conscience, condemn herself to a life built upon a tomb of another man's devotion. She found Rowan in the library, his back to her, staring out at the fading light. "Rowan," she said, her voice shaking with the force of her discovery. "You were right."
He turned, the haunted look in his eyes instantly replaced by a sharp, assessing intensity. Emilia held out the bundle of letters, the linen tie undone, exposing the brittle edges of the terrible truth. "I found them, not merely intercepted," she whispered, her gaze meeting his, filled now not with accusation, but with shared purpose. "But hidden, and I know who hid them." "Who?" Rowan demanded, stepping forward, his powerful hands resting on the edge of the table, ready for a fight. "Lord Ridley," she spat, the name tasting of ash. "The man who would be my husband. He kept them in my father's private study. The man who claims to love me, who offers security, is a villain who chose to steal not just a fortune, but 5 years of our lives." The shadows in the room seemed to deepen around them, but a fierce, undeniable light was ignited between them, the fire of shared outrage and the recognition of a love that had defied death and deceit. Their reunion was now complete, but the battle had only just begun. Part 3. The Battle for Her Heart. The library, now a scene of revelation, felt less like a refuge and more like a fortress preparing for siege. The letters, Rowan's voice, 5 years mute, lay scattered across the polished table, proof of a deep-seated conspiracy. Emilia and Rowan pored over them, the brittle paper a physical link to the past and to the horrific crime committed against their future. The close proximity was agonizing. Rowan, the scarred, silent man of war, stood inches from the woman who had once been his whole world. He was all hard lines and taut tension, she all soft curves and trembling resolve.
"He knew you would wait, Emilia." Rowan's voice was low, rough as grit. "He knew our attachment was not the fleeting fancy of a season, but a deep, true thing. He couldn't simply woo you away. He had to destroy my memory and secure my permanent removal from your life." "And you believed the lie that I had married another?" Emilia countered, a sting of old pain in her words. Rowan looked up, his gaze fixing on hers with an arresting, raw sincerity. He didn't offer a smooth excuse. "I was in the filth, Emilia. I was starving, wounded, and my spirit was bled dry. I was told the woman I loved had chosen comfort and security over a ghost. It was the only lie that could possibly be true. He paused, his scarred hand lifting, then dropping as if restraining a fierce impulse. But I never truly stopped fighting. The reason I survived the prison, the reason I crossed a ravaged Europe, the reason I stand here tonight is not because I am a good soldier, but because I am a desperate man. He took a ragged breath. I fought the war, Emilia, but I fought every day for the memory of you. Your face, your voice, the sheer promise of your future. You were my anchor, the one true thing I clung to when everything else was death and deceit. You were the only reason I survived to come home. If you had truly been lost to me, if you had truly married another, I would have found a means to die. The confession was delivered without melodrama, a stark, profound truth that laid bare his soul. It was the antithesis of the polished, passionless devotion offered by Lord Ridley. In that moment, Emilia's guilt over the impending engagement vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, incandescent realization. The man before her, scarred, fierce, and wounded, was the same heart that had left, only forged in fire. She loved him. She had never stopped. The 5 years had not extinguished her feelings. They had merely buried them under layers of grief and duty. "You are not a ghost, Rowan," she whispered, her own tears finally falling. "And I never gave up on you. I merely lived in the wrong kind of silence." They stood on the precipice. Her parents were now frantically trying to contact Lord Ridley to postpone the announcement, or, failing that, to buy Rowan's absolute silence. The decision, however, was no longer her parents' to make. Emilia had a choice: the safe path of silence, marrying Ridley to save her family from scandal and financial ruin, or the terrifying path of truth, standing with Rowan and facing the certain ruin of her reputation. "We cannot let him succeed," Emilia declared, her gentle voice infused with steel. "Not only because of what he did to us, but because of the man he must be to commit such a monstrous theft of life. I will not be bought, and I will not be silenced." The ballroom of Ashworth Hall glittered with a brittle, false gaiety. The elite of the county had assembled, all waiting for the moment when Lord Vincent Ridley, looking magnificent in his black coat, would stand beside Lady Emilia Ashford and formalize the brilliant, desirable alliance. Lord Ridley, having arrived late and seemingly ignorant of the dramatic upheaval in the house, was a picture of poised confidence. He offered Emilia his arm, his eyes cool and possessive. "A little pale, my dear," he murmured, his breath brushing her ear. "The excitement, I imagine." Emilia felt a shiver, not of excitement, but of revulsion. She met his gaze with a steady, defiant clarity that belied the turmoil of the past 24 hours. Lord Ashworth nervously tapped a silver spoon against a glass, demanding attention. The buzz of conversation ceased. He began the speech, the obligatory words of honor, stability, and alliance, leading up to the formal declaration. As he spoke the name of the prospective bridegroom, Emilia gently withdrew her arm from Lord Ridley's grasp, taking a step forward into the center of the room, drawing all eyes to her. "Before this alliance is cemented," Emilia said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the expectant silence, "there is a matter of honor that must be settled, a debt of truth that must be paid." A wave of confusion rippled through the assembly. Lord Ridley's face remained courteously impassive, but his eyes flashed with sudden, cold comprehension. "My lady," he began, attempting to take her hand, "the formalities are for another time." On the contrary, my lord, Emilia replied, turning her attention solely to him. This is the only formality that matters. You offered me stability, wealth, and position, but you offered them upon a foundation of absolute cruelty and deceit. The whispers started instantly, sharp as breaking glass. Emilia drew the bundle of letters from the inner pocket of her gown. They felt weighty, like scrolls of indictment. She held them up for all to see. 5 years ago, I mourned Captain Rowan Hale, presumed dead in action. 5 years ago, my heart was broken, and I accepted my duty to forget. Yet, Captain Hale did not die. He wrote, repeatedly, dozens of times, pleading to return, asking for assistance, declaring his undying devotion to me. These are those letters. She cast the letters upon the floor before Lord Ridley. Letters which never reached my hand, and which you, my lord, intercepted, knowing they proved his survival. Letters you hid in my father's study. Letters you exchanged for false information fed to a desperate soldier, assuring him that I had married and forgotten him. The collective gasp from the room was deafening. Lord Ridley's composure finally shattered. He surged forward, his hand raised, not to strike, but to silence her, to snatch the evidence. "This is monstrous slander," he bellowed, his voice losing its aristocratic veneer, revealing the frantic man beneath. "A desperate ploy by a vagrant soldier seeking money. I demand you retract this, Lady Emilia, or you will find yourself ruined." "Ruin," Emilia said softly, holding their ground, "is preferable to a life of lies." The room erupted. The ladies gasped and huddled. The men muttered, torn between the scandal and the undeniable presence of the scarred man, the ghost standing at the edge of the room. Society had turned. Emilia's future was collapsing around her, not with a whisper, but with a mighty crash. The glittering crowd saw only a madwoman choosing a penniless vagrant over the great, wealthy Lord Ridley. They saw scandal. They saw ruin. But as the noise swelled, one figure moved. Rowan Hale strode forward from the shadows, past the frightened countess, past the horrified earl, past the shouting Lord Ridley. His passage was silent and absolute, clearing a path through the throng as if he were parting a heavy mist. He stopped beside Emilia. His hand, the same strong, calloused hand that had written those letters, reached out and took hers. The gesture was fiercely proprietary, a claim made not with words or rings, but with the full force of his formidable presence. He did not look at the guests. He looked only at Emilia, his cold, weary eyes melting into a fire that only she was meant to see. "It seems, my lord," Rowan said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded silence far more effectively than the earl's tapping spoon, "that you have not only lost the lady's hand, but her life, and you will not touch either again." Then he ignored the entire scandalized assembly. He turned to Emilia, pulling her closer, shielding her from the hostile glare of society with the breadth of his body. He bent his head, his rough lips brushing her ear, and spoke a vow that was both a triumph and an absolution. "I crossed death itself to return to you. I will not lose you again." He led her away from the wreckage of the engagement and the ruins of her reputation. Their hands were tightly interlocked, their shoulders touching. They were wounded, changed, and facing an uncertain, impoverished, and scandal-ridden future. But they were together. They had reclaimed each other, not in a fairy tale, but in fire, truth, and the absolute certainty of an enduring, reclaimed love.